Welcome to our study tonight. Glad to have you with us. I want to give you the news, and I'm going to do that in a moment. But first, I was just alerted that in our store on our website, we have some, sounds prideful, I wish it's not, but Correll quotes, quotes that I've made through years of messages and teachings. And they're set with a background of pictures from Israel that were taken by, some of you may have known, Pastor Armand, who's actually a professional photographer. So they're available. They've dropped all the prices on them. So if you want to look at those, that would be great. All right, let me tell you about in the news this week. This one, and obviously we all know about our open border. This one is an open border is an open invitation to terror. And obviously we know that. 19 people. That's all it took to completely upend the world, even now, 23 years ago, after 9/11. America looks dramatically different today when a handful of radical Islamists slammed into their planes into the World Trade Towers and basically took the heart of our nation away, and its commerce, its security, and its way of life. We vowed then, never again, but the lessons of the past have been totally forgotten under this administration, as millions upon millions stream across our southern border. With no regard to the danger, the White House has thrown open the gates to a stampede of evildoers. Almost 300 people from the terror watch list have already been caught, but have they been kept? No, and how many more have escaped? In most cases, it takes more than 3 months for an agency to determine if someone is or was a known suspected terrorist. But incredibly, Democrats, including this president, don't care about the red lights on our southern border, only the green ones, ushering tens of thousands of unvetted foreigners into our country every single day. And setting aside the incalculable loss of human lives of 9/11, consider the toll of that attack alone, and it's still taking on our nation. Most modest estimates put the price tag of that horrible tragedy of 9/11 at $8 trillion. Around $100 billion of that is direct economic impact. But as Brown University's Watson Institute discovered, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what the U.S. has spent over the last 20 years in the global war on terror, a war incidentally precipitated by just 19 terrorists. There's been human costs, social costs, expanded homeland security, defense and State Department budgets, increased veteran expenses, property damage, and rebuilding. Then there's the interest we're paying on all of it, which is, are you ready for it? $1 trillion. I wonder how much our open borders will cost us in the future, in lives, in social upheaval, and in monetary losses. And what has open borders cost us so far? Well, so far we have seen a whole bunch of things going on in our open borders. That $8 trillion is a big number to get to, but we're getting there. And what are Democrats doing? They're shipping money we don't have overseas and refusing to deal with an open border that's planting countless sleeper cells on our soil. If 19 terrorists can inflict $8 trillion worth of damage on this country, imagine what 300 could do. According to congressional testimony, those are just the ones we've caught. There's no telling how many slipped through our hands and are now burrowed deep underground. For all we know, it could be 300 or 30,000. America cannot afford another 9/11. We need to protect our border and provide for our own national security before we attempt to help someone else. The time has come, as it did then, for a great people to defend a great nation. No wonder why number one on voters' agenda is the border, because it is a national security problem. Let's go a little bit further and tell you a little bit about this. I picked this up the other day, and I thought it was extremely interesting. It's called the Cloward-Piven strategy. The Cloward-Piven strategy is a political strategy outlined in 1966 by American sociologist and political activists Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven. It is the strategy of forcing political change, leading to societal collapse through orchestrated crises. Now, just listen closely to this. The Cloward-Piven strategy seeks to hasten the fall of capitalism by overloading the government bureaucracy with a flood of impossible demands, amassing massive, unpayable national debt, and other messages such as unfettered immigration, thus pushing society into crisis and economic collapse by overwhelming the United States. That's exactly what's happening. It was outlined in 1966. And this goes right along with it. Net zero climate push may create unstable U.S. power grid. Electricity is among the most essential sources of Americans' unparalleled prosperity and productivity. It is also the greatest in vulnerability. The United States has become so utterly dependent upon an uninterrupted supply of affordable electricity that, as our grid becomes even more fragile, American society has become fragile along with it. We don't think about this because it's something we take for granted, like going to your tap and pulling water out of it. Well, if America's electric grid were to go down for an extended period of time, such as, let's say, a year, there are essentially two estimates of how many people would die from hunger, from starvation, from lack of water, and from social disruption. One estimate is that within a year or so, 2/3 of the United States population would die. The other estimate is that within a year or so, 90% of the U.S. population would die. The energy grid is civilization's life support system. Without it, modern society collapses very quickly. Steve Pinker, author and Harvard psychology professor, wrote in a review of the book that energy is our primary defense against poverty, disorder, hunger, and death. And yet many nations in the West have engaged in a game of Russian roulette with their power grids in an attempt to reduce global temperatures. I'm really not sure what we're trying to accomplish with the Green Deal, trying to reduce global temperatures. We think that the world's in catastrophe and will expire if we don't do this, yet we're killing it even by trying to do this. Electricity regulators are becoming more vocal in sounding the alarm as well about environmentalists on the climate. A majority of America's grid is now at heightened risk levels for outages. Near collapse of Texas, remember that? Their power grid during the winter storm Uri in 2021, it rendered them unable to do anything. We learned that the Texas grid nearly failed, and if it had failed, tens of thousands of people would have died. If this could happen in Texas, the energy capital of the world, by the way, then the electric grid is really being undermined. The North American electric grid is rapidly becoming transitioned from one in which coal had once dominated to one that is seeing an ever-increasing share of wind, solar, and natural gas in the process. America's electric grid is changing from something that was once so reliable that consumers rarely thought about it to one that increasingly features rolling blackouts and may one day soon be on the brink of long-term failure. The destabilization of the power grid is the result of what analyst and author Meredith Angwin deems the fatal trifecta. The first part of the fatal trifecta is over-reliance on renewables, which go on and off when they want to. The second part is over-reliance on natural gas, which is delivered just in time and can be interrupted just in time. And the third part is relying on your neighbor when a crisis comes. All these factors came into play during Texas winter storm Uri in 2021. Wind and solar facilities were unable to deliver in the freezing weather, and supplies of natural gas were interrupted by freezing temperatures as well, just as people needed electricity to heat their homes. According to a Texas Comptroller's report, natural gas supplied 51% of Texas's electricity, wind 25%, and coal 13%. As these sources went offline, utilities frantically enacted blackouts to cut demand, fearing that a mismatch of supply and demand that lasted more than several minutes would cause long-term damage to the grid's hardware. Just several minutes. While Texas missed having a months-long outage of its electric grid by only a matter of minutes, the damage from short-term outages were severe. Rolling blackouts were intended to take stress off the power grid, but turned into outages that, in some parts of the state, lasted several days. In that short time, at least 210 deaths were attributed just to the outage. Texas followed the lead of Europe and California in transitioning their grid to wind and solar energy, retiring coal plants and sometimes nuclear plants as well, to halt global warming and please anti-nuclear activists. Because wind and solar are weather dependent, a dispatchable backup source is needed, and that source is typically natural gas. As Europe, California, and Texas have learned, this transition creates vulnerability compared to coal and nuclear plants, where fuel can be stored on site. It also has led to sharply increased prices for electricity. I'm sure most of you are feeling that already. As dual systems of power generators need to be built, along with additional transmission infrastructure. Some European countries, like Germany, are restarting their coal plants as wind and solar fail to meet their demand, even at inflated prices. laws and regulations in Europe and the United States have sought to ban or phase out oil and gas heating in homes, along with gasoline-powered cars, trucks, and buses. The effect of this will be to make people more dependent on electricity while pushing up demands to levels that many say the grid just can't handle. We're seeing the grid's reliability, resilience, and affordability are all declining, while these pressure groups are trying to put yet more demand on it. This is a date with disaster. I'm not sure what they're trying to do, but they are actually gutting our productivity. Despite headline nuclear catastrophes at plants like Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima, many countries are now building new nuclear plants or delaying closures of existing nuclear plants, considering it the cleanest and least environmentally harmful source of electricity. According to a report by the Nuclear Energy Institute, wind farms, listen to this, require up to 360 times as much land area to produce the same amount of electricity as a nuclear energy facility, and solar facilities which require only 70 times less the land space. Compared to coal and natural gas plants, wind and solar consume at least 10 times as much land, according to the left-leaning Brookings Institution. In addition to a smaller footprint, nuclear power stations also typically do not require the construction of thousands and thousands of miles of new transmission lines to reach remote locations, where wind and solar facilities are typically built. With nuclear, we don't need to expand the grid. We can use the grid we have. With the Inflation Reduction Act and the investment tax credits, production tax credits, all of the fiscal incentives in the power gen sector are to build more and more wind and solar. To me, that's just absolutely crazy town, because we're hurting ourselves. Let's go a little bit further and talk to you a little bit about Israel. U.S. and Arab states plotting imposed peace plan upon Israel. A scheme has been uncovered recently that apparently would involve announcing publicly, unilaterally, a Palestinian state right away, and it's drawing a chorus of objections. Described by the Washington Post, it calls for, quote, the withdrawal of many, if not all, settler communities on the West Bank, a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, the reconstruction of Gaza, and security and governance arrangements for a combined West Bank and Gaza. Stunningly, the action could involve early U.S. recognition of a Palestinian state. If our president does that, it's going to be one of the worst things he's ever done. And he's done a whole lot of bad things. The discussion is stunning in that only in October, terrorists from Hamas, which works out of Palestinian-controlled Gaza, invaded Israel and butchered some 1,200 civilians. The scheme apparently is the work of the U.S. and several Arab states. Israel, according to reports, would be left out of the process entirely. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been opposed to such a move and has said so. 1,400 murdered, and the world wants to give them a state. It won't happen, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said on social media. The intention of the U.S., together with Arab states, to establish a terror state alongside the state of Israel is a delusional and part of the misguided conception that there is a partner for peace on the other side. While we are in the government, no Palestinian state will be established. Polls show that most of the Palestinian people don't actually want a two-state solution at all, on any terms, with any borders. They want to wipe Israel off the face of the map. Hamas leaders have said it's unacceptable for them to be expected to recognize Israel in any form. And yet, our president and this administration is pushing just that, thinking absurdly that they can actually make an announcement that they're going to declare a Palestinian state. I'm telling you, they need to stay out of it as much as they possibly can. And I hope they do. Let me go a little bit more with the economy. All of the elements are in place for an economic crisis of staggering proportions. You know, when I read these things, I think, man, I've been telling this. I've been saying this. And it's almost, I feel like the little boy that called wolf. But it's still mounting up. Listen to this. They were able to delay the U.S. economy's day of reckoning, but they were not able to pull it off indefinitely. During the pandemic, the Federal Reserve pumped trillions of dollars into the financial system, and our politicians borrowed and spent trillions of dollars that we just didn't have. All of that money caused quite a bit of inflation, but it also created a sugar rush for our economy. Unfortunately, there will be a great price to be paid for such short-term thinking. From the federal government on down, our entire society is absolutely drowning in debt. And now it appears that our economic problems are about to go to the next level. In early 2024, there are all sorts of signs that economic activity in the United States is really starting to slow down. For example, We just learned that consumer spending fell sharply during the month of January. Even excluding autos, sales dropped 1%, well below the estimate for a gain of 0.2%. Sadly, the truth is that the U.S. consumers just don't have as much money to spend these days. They're up to their eyeballs in debt, and delinquency rates have been spiking. Disney lost more than 1 million subscribers, during the fourth quarter of last year alone. In early 2024, we've also seen large employers ruthlessly slash payrolls all over the nation. This is what you're not being told by the administration or the secular news. Some of the most shocking layoffs that we have seen recently comes from Zero Hedge. I'm going to read them for you. These companies: Twitch, 35% of the workforce they laid off. Roomba, 31%. Hasbro, 20%. The LA Times, 20%. Spotify, 17%. Levi's, 15%. Xerox, 25%. Quadratics, 14%. Wayfair, 13%. Duolingo, 10%. The Washington Post, 15%. Snap, 15%. eBay, 10%. Business Insider, 10%. PayPal, 7%. Okta, 7%. Charles Schwab, 6%. DocuSign, 6%. Cisco, 5%. This is of the workforce that they've laid off just in the last year. UPS, 8%. BlackRock, 3%. Paramount, 3%. Citigroup, 20,000 employees laid off. Pixel, 1,300 employees laid off. So we're watching it. We're not being told, but we're watching it. Meanwhile, the cost of living continues to rise faster than paychecks. For example, it's being reported that the cost of auto insurance has been increasing at the fastest annual rate ever on record. In January, auto insurance rose, bringing the total annual gain to 21%. When compared with early 2019, motor vehicle insurance is nearly 40% more expensive. Experts say the problem could soon get worse before it gets any better. Needless to say, most Americans have not seen their paychecks increase by 20% over the past year. So our financial institutions are sitting on mountains of bad commercial real estate loans. Regional banks are doomed. In the next 3 to 5 years, thousands more regional bank institutions will fail. Needless to say, it isn't just the U.S. that's experiencing economic turbulence these days. This week, we learned that the Japanese economy has officially entered a recession. By the way, it's lost its spot as the world's third largest economy to Germany, as the Asian giant unexpectedly slipped into recession. The Germans are not far behind. They're facing big problems too. In fact, Germany is being called the sick man of Europe right now. It's at this time that Jeff Bezos has decided, now listen because these are gems for you, has decided to sell off billions of dollars worth of Amazon stock. Why would he sell his Amazon stock, billions of dollars? He doesn't need the money, so why would he do it? Well, an Amazon filing on Tuesday showed that Bezos, who stepped down as the Seattle-based company's chief executive in 2021, but remains executive chair, sold 12 million shares for about $2 billion between Friday and Monday. He doesn't need the money, so why is he doing it? Why would he sell that? You have to ask yourself a question. Does he know something most of us don't know? Well, I don't think so. Instead, I think he can see what the rest of us can't see. Stock prices have risen to record highs, even as the overall economy is clearly heading into a major downturn. That's an oxymoron. It should be going down with it, but it's not. That makes this the perfect time to sell. Everything's high. Jeff Bezos didn't get to where he is by being stupid. He can see what's coming and he's getting out while the getting is still good. Economic collapse and economic strain is happening in the world. And we know revelation-wise, prophecy-wise, it has to, because there's going to be a barrier in selling, buying and selling. Antichrist is going to control it. And why would he be able to control it? Because everybody else failed at controlling it, and we're heading that way. Let's go a little bit further and tell you a little bit about religion. In America, on the precipice of Christian invisibility. Americans are rejecting God and following their hearts to destruction and emptiness at a rapid pace. A sobering conclusion to a brand new study is that it appears America is on the precipice of Christian invisibility. The new study from the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University reveals the 5 core beliefs rejected by 8 to 12-year-olds. 8 to 12-year-olds reject this: the Bible, absolute truth, the means to salvation, the purpose of life and success. 8 to 12-year-olds. Dr. George Barna states, Quote, children are following in the unfortunate spiritual footsteps of the generations that have preceded them. And this trajectory leads to the total abandonment of biblical Christianity in record numbers. Research continues to show a decreasing percentage of Americans embracing the biblical worldview, including only 2% of parents of young children today. Only 2% of parents of young children embrace a biblical worldview. Let me repeat that. 2% of the kids, parents. What then are they teaching and molding for their children? Secularism, moral relativism, atheism, or religious pluralism. Sadly, since God has basically been removed from our culture and government, how can the nation remain truly free and maintain individual rights? Removing God, America will instead get government granted, government dispersed, government redistributed, government of Marxism and communism. Without a biblical worldview, we become subject to the ever-changing human definitions of right and wrong, good and bad, moral and immoral. Mob rule becomes the governing force. Those with the loudest voice, the biggest platforms, most powerful or powerfully persuasive means of imposing their will are the dictators of law and order. And we've been seeing that. Only 21% of children between 8 and 12 believe the concept of truth and moral absolutes. And they do not see the Bible as an aid to help determine right and wrong. Our founding fathers, as well as our great-grandparents, would be dismayed and horrified at these results. So what about us? What are we to think about today's high-tech, culture-driven, social media society and its effect it's having on kids? Regardless of whether or not they have true Christian parents, it breeds narcissism and an unhealthy focus on self. The Bible warns about being lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. 2 Timothy. Sarah Holliday at the Washington Stand also weighed in on the new study from a different angle. She points out the sad reality that the mental health of today's teenagers has worsened and believes it is a logical result of a world turning away from Christ. Young people now are growing up in a society that believes men can be women and vice versa. They're being raised to believe that marriage has nothing to do with God and that sex, specifically outside of marriage, has no consequences. Truth is subjective, and children can carve out their own reality as they enter adulthood. This is detrimental for physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. Children are growing up in a broken, divisive world. Young people are desperately trying to find their identity and make sense of this life, but with no spiritual foundation, they're bombarded and surrounded by bad actors, demonic influencers, lies, seductive philosophies being promoted as good. We're seeing the highest rates in biblical illiteracy and the lowest rates of biblical worldview, which leads to disorder, destruction, and death. We cannot pass on what we, today's young parents, don't possess. They can't pass it on if they don't possess it. Paul wrote to Timothy, providing a great example of raising up children in the ways of the Lord. He said this, "For I am mindful of thy sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I'm sure that it is in you as well." Moms and dads, it's your responsibility to model Christ and teach the truth to your kids and to your grandkids. Take every opportunity to do it because their society is not doing it. We are messengers of reconciliation, preachers of truth to a culture that needs some good news about God who loves them and forgives them. In Him, we still trust. And this is kind of interesting. If you've seen the Super Bowl, a lot of people did, and there was an ad about He Gets Us, and very controversial. So the Christian Super Bowl ad, they should have made. A Christian pastor is sharing what he says would have been a more effective message than the He Gets Us ad that debuted on Super Bowl Sunday. The pastor said that He Gets Us commercial may have been perhaps well-intentioned, but ultimately failed to convey anything of the gospel to the hundreds of millions who saw it. Featuring real-life public figures instead of AI-generated image of people who don't exist, which that one was. This pastor's name is Brambix. His video already has over 2 million views on Twitter and nearly 300,000 on YouTube. And by the way, I suggest you really listen to it. I listened to it the other day, was blown away. It should have been all over the Super Bowl. The video begins with an image of a celebrity, Kat Von D, a celebrity tattoo artist who abandoned witchcraft last year to become a baptized Christian, accompanied by the words, "former witch." Next up is Josh Timonen, who worked on the book God is a Delusion, a former atheist before he converted to Christianity. The ad cycles through a host of real-life individuals who left behind their sinful past to embrace Christianity. A former jihadist, a former drug addict, a former KKK member, a former gang leader, a former drag queen, a former prostitute, always with the words former in yellow. Bamberg's video says Jesus doesn't just get us, he saves us. He transforms us. He cleanses us. He restores us. He forgives us. He heals us. He delivers us. He redeems us. He loves us. It ends with the words, so are some of you. He gets us ad depicted still images of people washing the feet of others in obvious imitation of Christ, the one that played the Super Bowl, but generated almost instant backlash from Christians online and around the globe, like Bambrick. Many said that the commercial was likely well-intentioned, but some criticized it for seemingly condoning grave sins, such as abortion or sexual immorality. And others said the ad was too politicized, with a clear left-wing bias. He Gets Us framed evangelism with a leftward binge, communicating the responsibility and respectability of certain sins over others in our culture. The Babylon Bee produced its own parody of the He Gets Us ad. Channeling C.S. Lewis' Screwtape, that video depicts a homosexual couple toasting each other with words, "He accepts you just as you are," followed by a montage of images depicting other sins common in America today, such as gluttony, drug abuse, looting, and rioting. He Gets Us is great, but let me tell you something. He does forgive us, and we have to come to him with the penitence. We can't say he gets us just because of our lifestyles and it's okay. That is an American type of Christianity, and it is definitely wrong. He never wants you to change, the parody continued. This was from the Babylon Bee. He believes in you. He affirms everything about you, especially your sin. He wants to be with you in eternity forever. The ad ends with the following words coming up on the screen. Satan, he gets us. I encourage you to go online and watch Bam Burrell's video. He saves us. It will give you chills. It did me. It's an amazing portrayal of what Jesus really does for sinners. Well, I hate to give you into wokeism, but here's an article. State wants parents charged with abuse for opposing child's gender change. A new bill introduced in Illinois is causing alarm among parental rights groups. HB 4876 was introduced by Representative Ann Stava Murray and would amend the Abused and Neglected Child Reporting Act to include children denied necessary medical care as being victims of abuse. Amends an Abused and Neglected Child Reporting Act provides that abused child means a child whose parent or immediate family member or any person responsible for the child's welfare or any individual residing in the same home as the child or a paramour of the child's parent denies the child access to necessary medical care, including, but not limited to, primary care services, abortion services, and gender-affirming services. It specifies that the consent to the performance of abortion services and gender-affirming services executed by a minor is valid. Provides that a healthcare professional rendering abortion services and gender-affirming services shall not incur civil or criminal liability for failure to obtain valid consent or professional discipline for failure to obtain valid consent if the healthcare professional relied in good faith on the representations made by the minor. In other words, they can't be arrested or charged with anything if they didn't consult with the parents. Illinois is already one of the most pro-abortion states in the country. Governor J.B. Pritzker, the wealthiest politician in the country, announced his goal to make abortion a right in the state constitution last year. With HB 4876, parents presumably would not only be left out of the decision by a child to have an abortion, they could also face child abuse charges if they're deemed as attempting to prevent it. There are a growing number of states, 11 as of June 2023, declaring themselves sanctuary states for trans-identified minors. Many parents are waking up to the fact that if they don't take a stand, trans rights will trump parental rights. For some states, it's already too late. And lastly tonight, I want to give you this. Creation continues to baffle scientists. For some, science is an all-powerful God of sorts that explains everything, and many scientists can arrogantly conclude that they have revealed all knowledge on some aspect of our universe. This fits hand in hand with our Genesis study. Yet new discoveries often demonstrate how foolish such conclusions really are. As the Bible notes about godless human beings professing to be wise, they become fools in Romans 1:22. The BBC recently reported scientists at the University of Central Lancashire have discovered a gigantic ring-shaped structure in space. You're looking at it in that chart. That's 1.3 billion light years in diameter. This big ring is comprised of multiple galaxies and galaxy clusters. It's so big, it challenges our understanding of the universe. According to one of the astronomers' guiding principles, the cosmological principle, beginning of things, structures this large should not exist because all matter is expected to spread out evenly across the universe. Yet this is the seventh massive structure, again, that should not exist, to be discovered in the universe in recent years. Their ultra-large sizes, distinctive shapes, and cosmological proximity must surely be telling us something important. But what exactly, one scientist said. A physics professor from the University of Warwick also commented, it's incredibly hard to conceive of any mechanism that could produce these structures, so instead the authors speculate that we are seeing a relic from the early universe where waves of high and low density material are frozen in extragalactic medium, blah, 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 blah. That's a bunch of hogwash because they don't want to accept that God created it. While such a mechanism may be, he says, incredibly hard to conceive of, the God of the creation, the God who created the universe, continues to show these scientists who do not believe in him that he's capable of surprising them and contradicting all of their assumptions. The God of the Bible says the wise and mighty of this world. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. When you view the creation through that lens of the Bible, scientific discoveries often come into a much clearer focus. So it's all bad news. So what I want to do for you is I want to inject some good news to remember tonight. And that good news is here, Psalm 37. I just feel that sometimes I just need to give you the good news. This is how it applies to all the news. Do not be agitated by evildoers. Do not envy those who do wrong, for they wither quickly like grass and will like tender green wilt like tender green plants. Trust in the Lord and do what is good. Dwell in the land and live securely. Take delight in the Lord and he'll deliver you your heart's desires. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him and he will act, making your righteousness shine like the dawn, your justice like the noonday. Be silent before the Lord and wait expectantly for him. Do not be agitated by one who prospers in his way. Think of those words. Do not be agitated by evildoers. Do not envy those who do wrong. That's in the news, and that is a recap of what God says about the things that are happening today in our world.